Well, hello and welcome back. Tonight we're going to be taking a look at the transition pistols that occurred between the Model 1911 and the Model 1911A1. So the way this all started was on September 15th of 1920, the Chief of Technical Staff of the Ordnance Department requested that the Cavalry Board comment on some modifications that were recommended from a recognized civilian pistol shooter named Marcellus Rambo. Now he recommended, had three different recommendations, and one was to reduce the length of the hammer, reduce the length of the trigger, and eliminate the loose fit between the slide and the receiver. Now this request set off a series of tests through the military that lasted over 2 years. The first one was conducted in November of 1920 by the experimental section of the Cavalry Board at Fort Riley, Kansas. And they looked at what those recommendations were, and they noted and agreed with the hammer bite, and they said even with the average man that the hand was getting pinched there. And they noted that many instructors and students would wear adhesive tape in this part of the finger or the hand to avoid that tissue from being chewed up from the hammer. But anyway, the third defect was not found, and that third defect being the loose fit between the slide. In an interesting quote I have here, it says, "It seems possible that the salvaged pistol picked up by Mr. Rambo was rusty, and that in cleaning it, enough metal might have been removed to cause the loose play described." So they didn't think he had a very good pistol, evidently. And they also noted that the trigger was too long. They thought that too, for an average hand or even a man with large hands, that trigger was just a little too long. Another interesting bit of input came from the 1st Cavalry in Arizona in November of 1921, and they recommended that the hump be added to the back of the mainspring housing. And I have a quote from a 1st Lieutenant William Windstrom. He said, "It gave a more desirable angle to the rear of the grip, forced the shooter to take the correct grip with the hand well up on the stock, and corrected the tendency of the untrained pistol shots to aim low." So 10 modified pistols were shipped to the Cavalry Board at Fort Riley for testing on August 10th of 1922, and the test revealed that there were more modifications necessary. Now the first modification they came up with was finger clearance cuts here on the side of the receiver. And then they wanted also, checkering on the hump of the mainspring housing and checkering on the front of the trigger. And so after 2.5 years, and in April of 1923, the Infantry and Cavalry Armament Division recommended to the technical staff of the Ordnance Committee that the alterations that were recommended be adopted. And so there was really not too much debate on it. And they thought they were all good changes to the pistol. And so on April 20th of 1923, this became the improved model of 1911, and it was standardized. And the Ordnance Department considered retrofitting all the pistols that they had up to that point, but just decided that it was too expensive because they were all still interchangeable even with these modifications. And the interchangeability is so important. I'm going to do another video on that for those of you that are interested in that. So the designation of Model 1911A1 wasn't changed until 3 years later, and then Colt was awarded a contract for 10,000 pistols, and that was in June of 1923, and the pistols were a set cost at $26.50 each, and they were to be supplied without magazines, because Springfield Armory still had 10,000 magazines in stock from World War I. Now, in this order of 10,000 pistols, there were going to be 1,000 national match pistols that would be selected and set aside. And we'll get to the serial numbers now. And what they did was they decided that since the last serial number issued for World War I was 629,500, that they would just start at 700,001 and go up to 710,000, reserving 709,001 to 710,000 for the national match pistols that they were going to put aside at Springfield Armory. Now, some of the things that went on with these was, let's see here. There were the stocks were to be completely checkered. You can see here that the diamond is no longer on these grips. Colts requested 40 changes to conform with their commercial model, and there was no effect on the interchangeability with the military models. They just wanted to have more of the parts uniform there at Colts. Some other things that were done that aren't really known or talked about are the recoil spring strength was reduced to allow easier cocking, and the sight attachment up here is gone now to a wider base. It was very narrow, and there was a problem with these sights coming loose during World War I. Now the sight was made slightly wider. The slide stop angle was changed, and that was just to conform with the manufacturing process. So there was practices that were going on at Colts that had been changed. They just wanted to make them official, and this was their way to do it, to kind of get them in now, so to speak. The rear sight was heightened. The safety lock had some minor changes in the way it was just machined and looked. Didn't affect any of the interchangeability at all. And let's see, that's it for just a quick overview of those. Now I'm going to go ahead and show you the inspection mark that's on this. And this inspection mark, for those of you that are not familiar with it, is right here below the slide stop. And this has WTG for Captain Walter T. Gorton, his inspection mark. And the pistols, the 10,000 that were ordered, the delivery started on those in January of 1924, and by April 5,000 pistols had been delivered. Now they had tested those with standard Winchester ammo, and they all performed fine, but during April 250 of the National Match pistols were tested with Frankfurt Arsenal ammo, and about 144 misfires occurred. And at first they thought it was the primers, but they found it to be a weak mainspring, and Colts had requested to make the mainspring just slightly smaller, and as soon as that was discovered, they withdrew that request, of course, and they issued a recall for the pistols that had already been purchased by officers, so that they could get that mainspring fixed back to the one that they had prior, which had no issues at all with that Frankfurt Arsenal primers. So, excuse me. Anyway, we get down to the designation and how they came up with a 1911A1. So they kicked it around to a few different divisions, and they had their different input in. And the Infantry and Aircraft Armament Division recommended that it be designated the Pistol Automatic Caliber 45 M1911A1. Now the Field Service recommended that it be the Pistol Automatic Caliber 45 M1. And after some thought, it was recommended that Model 1911A1, of course, because the improvements did not affect the mechanical function in any way. Although the parts have been changed, they did not affect interchangeability. Now, this went retroactive back to serial number 700,000, even though they started at 701,000. But anyway, so this pistol here, we'll take a really quick look at it. You can see this one doesn't have the mainspring housing hump. It does have the full checkered grips. This still has the longer trigger, but it does have the finger clearance cuts in it, and it does show the different slide stop on here. We'll go ahead and flip it over and take another look. Now this one is at 701,586, so it's well early in those 10,000 pistols, and perhaps that's why it doesn't have the mainspring housing hump on it. But much better sights on this. You can see how wide this front sight is, and then the rear sight here, it gives an excellent sight picture now. Those early ones, the sight picture is just really hard to bring up and get a good look at. Well, anyway, there you go. The transition models that occurred before we got to the 1911A1. Thanks for tuning in and watching. Hope you enjoyed this video, and have a good evening.